The man in the expensive suit didn't knock. He just walked into Fred Rogers' office like he owned it. In a way, he did. His name was Richard Caldwell, and he was the CEO of Caldwell Foods, the largest sponsor of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. His company's commercials paid for more than half of the show's production costs. Without Caldwell Foods, the show would likely cease to exist. Richard Caldwell knew this, and he was counting on Fred Rogers knowing it too. "Fred, we need to talk." Fred Rogers looked up from the puppet he was repairing. It was Daniel Tiger, worn from years of use. Fred had been hand-stitching a tear in the fabric. "Hello, Richard. Would you like to sit down?" Caldwell didn't sit. He closed the door behind him and stood in the middle of the small office, his presence filling the room with an energy that felt like a threat. "I'm going to be direct. Fred, our board has concerns about the show." Fred set down Daniel Tiger carefully. "What kind of concerns?" Caldwell pulled out a folder from his briefcase and dropped it on Fred's desk. Inside were photographs, production stills from recent episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Fred looked at them, confused. They were just normal scenes from the show. Children playing, Fred talking to the camera, Officer Clemmons visiting the neighborhood. Then he understood. Every photograph featured black children, or Officer Clemmons, or both. "I don't understand what the concern is," Fred said quietly, though he was beginning to. Caldwell leaned forward, his hands on Fred's desk. "Fred, let me explain something about business. Our products sell in every state in this country, including the South. Our sales in the South have dropped 17% in the last 6 months. I'm sorry to hear that." "Do you know why they've dropped?" Fred didn't answer. "Because Southern retailers are telling us that our brand is becoming associated with, well, let's call it progressive values. And Southern consumers don't like that. They're choosing competitors' products instead." Fred Rogers folded his hands on his desk. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Richard?" Caldwell straightened up. "I'm asking you to be more balanced in your casting choices. You don't need to eliminate diversity entirely. Just reduce it significantly. Maybe 1 black child per episode instead of 5. Maybe Officer Clemmons visits once a month instead of twice a week." The room was silent. Fred Rogers looked at the photographs on his desk. One of them showed a little girl named Maya, 6 years old, pigtails, the biggest smile Fred had ever seen. She'd been so excited to be on the show. She told Fred it was the best day of her entire life. "No," Fred said quietly. Caldwell blinked. "Excuse me? No, I'm not going to do that. Fred, I don't think you understand the financial reality here. Caldwell Foods provides 52% of your show's funding. If we pull our sponsorship, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood will be canceled. It's that simple. Then it will be canceled." Caldwell stared at him. "You're willing to end your life's work over this?" "I'm willing to end my show rather than teach children that some people matter less than others based on the color of their skin. Yes." Caldwell's face hardened. "Fred, be reasonable. This is business. This isn't personal. We're not asking you to say anything racist. We're just asking you to be strategic, to recognize that your audience isn't just coastal liberals. There are people in this country who don't want their children watching integrated programming." Fred Rogers stood up. He was not a tall man, and Richard Caldwell towered over him. But when Fred spoke, there was a quiet power in his voice that made Caldwell take a step back. "Richard, those people are wrong, and I will not adjust my show to accommodate bigotry. Every child deserves to see themselves represented on television. Every child deserves to see that they matter, that they're valued, that they belong. I will not tell black children that they need to be less visible so that racist adults can feel more comfortable. This is economic suicide. Fred, then I suppose I'm committing economic suicide. Caldwell grabbed his briefcase. You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, we're pulling our sponsorship. And when this show gets canceled, it'll be because you chose politics over children. No, Richard. If this show gets canceled, it will be because your company chose racism over children. Don't confuse the two. Caldwell slammed the door on his way out. Fred Rogers sat back down at his desk. His hands were shaking. He picked up Daniel Tiger and continued stitching the tear, but his vision was blurred. He was crying, not because he was afraid, but because he was angry. And Fred Rogers didn't get angry often. The news spread through the PBS offices within hours. Caldwell Foods was pulling their sponsorship. Effective immediately. No negotiation. No compromise. The production manager came to Fred's office in a panic. Fred, this is a disaster. We can't produce the show without that money. We'll have to shut down. We'll have to lay off the entire crew. Do you understand what this means? Yes, Fred said quietly. I understand. Then why did you do it? Why didn't you just compromise a little? Reduce the diversity a little? Keep the show on the air? Fred looked at him with those steady, kind eyes. Because if I compromise on this, then everything I've ever said to children is a lie. I've told them they're special just the way they are. I've told them everyone is equally important. I've told them to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. He paused. How can I tell children those things and then turn around and make some children less visible because adults are racist? I would be teaching children that integrity doesn't matter. That money matters more than morals. That you should compromise your values when it's convenient. But the show will end with integrity, or it won't end at all. Those are the only two options. Asterisk, the next week was chaos. PBS executives held emergency meetings. Other sponsors were contacted, but none of them could match what Caldwell Foods had been providing. The math was brutal. Without a major sponsor, the show was financially unsustainable. The crew was devastated. These weren't just employees. They were people who had dedicated years of their lives to Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. They believed in what the show represented. And now it was ending because Fred had said no to racism. Some of them were angry. A cameraman named Doug cornered Fred in the hallway. My daughter's going to college next year, Fred. I needed this job. And you threw it away over, what? A few extra black kids in the background? Was that really worth everyone's jobs? Fred Rogers didn't get defensive. He just looked at Doug with compassion. Doug, I'm so sorry this is affecting your family. I truly am. But I need you to understand something. Those aren't a few extra black kids in the background. They're children. Real children with names and dreams and families. And they deserve to be on television just as much as white children do. He paused. If we start deciding which children get to be visible based on what makes racists comfortable, then we've lost. We've taught the next generation that discrimination is acceptable if it's economically convenient. And I will not do that. Doug looked at Fred for a long moment. Then his anger crumbled. I know you're right. I'm just scared. I'm scared too, Fred admitted. But being scared doesn't mean we get to be wrong. The final episode before the shutdown was scheduled to air in 2 weeks. Fred Rogers decided that if this was going to be the end, he was going to end it on his terms. He wrote a special episode. Not a typical Mr. Rogers neighborhood episode, but something different. Something honest. The episode opened with Fred sitting in his usual chair, wearing his cardigan. But he wasn't smiling his usual gentle smile. He looked serious, sad. Hello, friends. I need to talk to you about something important today. something sad. This may be one of the last times we get to visit together like this. And I want to tell you why that there are some grown-ups who think that the children on this show should all look the same. They think that children with different colored skin shouldn't play together. On TV, they think that some children should be less visible than others. I disagree with those grown-ups. Very much. I believe that every child is special. Every child is valuable. Every child deserves to be seen and heard and celebrated, no matter what they look like, no matter where they come from, no matter what color their skin is dyed. And because I believe that so strongly, some people don't want to support this show anymore. So this might be the last time we get to be neighbors, but I want you to know something. Even if our show ends, the truth doesn't change. You are still special. You still matter. You are still valuable, exactly the way you are. And the grown-ups who think some children should be invisible, they're wrong. They're very, very wrong. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you're less important because of how you look. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you should hide who you are. You are perfect, just the way you are. And I'm so grateful I got to be your neighbor. Fred Rogers' voice cracked on the last sentence. Behind the cameras, the crew was crying. The episode aired on a Friday afternoon. And then something happened that no one expected. The letters started arriving on Monday morning. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. Then tens of thousands. Letters from parents. Letters from teachers. Letters from children. Letters from pastors and rabbis and community leaders. All saying the same thing. Don't let this show end. But more than that, they were sending money. $5 here. $10 there. 20. 50. A schoolteacher in Ohio sent $100 with a note. This is my entire paycheck this month. But Mr. Rogers is worth it. A church in Alabama, a white church in the Deep South, took up a special collection and sent $5,000. We heard what happened, the pastor wrote. We heard that your show is ending because you refused to make black children less visible. As Christians, we are ashamed that this is being done in our region's name. Please accept this donation. And please don't stop. More churches followed. Then synagogues. Then mosques. Then schools. Then individuals. Within 2 weeks, over $3 million had been donated to keep Mr. Rogers' neighborhood on the air. PBS executives were stunned. Fred, this is unprecedented. We've never seen this kind of grassroots response to anything. But Fred Rogers wasn't surprised. Children understand fairness, he said simply. And their parents understand what it means to teach the right values. They're voting with their dollars for the kind of world they want their children to grow up in. Richard Caldwell called 3 weeks after pulling his sponsorship. Fred, I'd like to discuss renewing our partnership. No. Thank you, Richard. There was a pause. I'm sorry, what? We don't need Caldwell Foods anymore. We have all the funding we need now. From people who believe in what we're doing. Fred, be reasonable. We're offering to restore full sponsorship. We've reconsidered our position. Your company told me to make black children less visible. And I said no. That decision cost me your sponsorship. But it also showed me, and showed the country, what this show really stands for. We're stronger without you than we were with you. Fred, Richard, I need you to understand something. The children watching this show aren't learning letters and numbers just so they can grow up and buy your products. They're learning how to be good people, how to treat others with respect, how to stand up for what's right. Fred's voice was gentle but firm. Your company asked me to compromise those values. And you're calling now because you realized that was a mistake, not morally, but financially. The backlash has hurt your brand more than the Southern sales ever did. There was silence on the other end of the line. You're right, Caldwell said quietly. We made a mistake. And I'm calling to apologize. I appreciate that, Richard. Truly. But the answer is still no. This show will never again be sponsored by a company that views children as anything less than equal. Asterisk Mr. Rogers. Neighborhood continued for another 25 years. It never again relied on a single major corporate sponsor. Instead, it was funded by thousands of small donations, PBS grants, and mission-aligned sponsors who believed in inclusion. The episode where Fred addressed the racism issue was never aired again. Fred felt it had served its purpose. But copies circulated. Parents showed it to their children. Teachers used it in classrooms. It became one of the most pirated, most copied, most shared pieces of children's programming in history. Because it taught a lesson that went beyond anything Fred had ever said in a typical episode. It taught children that sometimes doing the right thing costs you something. That sometimes standing up for others means standing alone. That integrity matters more than money. And it taught adults something too. That children are watching how we behave when our values are tested. Asterisk years later, when Fred Rogers was asked about the incident in an interview, he was characteristically humble. It wasn't a difficult decision, he said. The difficult part was watching good people, my crew, my colleagues suffer because of it. That broke my heart. But you don't regret it? Regret what? Standing up for children? No, I would make the same choice again tomorrow. Even knowing it could have ended your show? Fred Rogers was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that the interviewer never forgot. If my show had continued after I agreed to make some children invisible, it wouldn't have been my show anymore. It would have been a lie wearing my cardigan. And lies don't help children. They hurt them. He paused. So yes, I would have let the show end. Because teaching children that racism is acceptable when it's economically convenient would have been the worst thing I could possibly do. It would have betrayed everything the show stood for. Do you think you changed anything by standing up like that? Fred Rogers smiled. I think I kept a promise. I promised every child that they mattered, that they were special just the way they are. And when someone asked me to break that promise, I said no. Even though it almost cost you everything. Especially because it almost cost me everything. Promises don't mean anything if you only keep them when it's convenient. The incident with Caldwell Foods was never widely publicized during Fred Rogers' lifetime. It happened quietly, resolved quietly, and faded into the background of television history. But the people who were there never forgot. Francois, Clemmons' Officer Clemmons heard about what Fred had done. About the sponsor who wanted fewer black faces on the show. About Fred's immediate, uncompromising refusal. Years later, Francois would say, "That's when I knew." Fred didn't just talk about equality. He was willing to lose everything for it. He was willing to end his show rather than make me less visible. That kind of love changes you. It changed me. The crew members who were there, who watched Fred choose principle over paycheck, carried that lesson with them for the rest of their careers. Doug, the cameraman who had been angry about losing his job, later became a director. He made it a point to ensure diverse representation in every project he worked on. Fred taught me that the right choice isn't always the easy choice, he said. But it's still the right choice. And the children who grew up watching Mr. Rogers' neighborhood who saw themselves represented on screen, regardless of their race, they learned something that no curriculum could teach. They learned that they mattered. Not despite their differences, but including their differences. They learned that there were adults who would fight for them, who would sacrifice for them, who believed they deserved to be seen. The story of Fred Rogers and the racist sponsor isn't in most biographies. It's not in the documentaries. It's not part of the official narrative, but it should be, because it reveals something essential about who Fred Rogers was when no cameras were rolling. When the choice wasn't between good and better, but between right and easy. He chose right. Every single time. Even when right meant risking everything he built. Even when right meant economic uncertainty. Even when right meant people he cared about would suffer. He chose right. Because he understood something that many of us forget. Children are watching. Not just watching the show. Watching us. Watching how we behave when our values cost us something. Watching whether we actually mean the things we say we believe. And Fred Rogers refused to teach children that integrity was negotiable. He refused to teach them that money mattered more than morals. He refused to teach them that some people were less valuable than others. Instead, he taught them, through his actions, not just his words, that doing the right thing matters. Even when it's hard. Even when it costs you. Even when you're afraid. That's the real legacy of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Not the songs. Not the puppets. Not the cardigan. The refusal to compromise. The insistence on treating every child as equally valuable. The willingness to sacrifice everything rather than betray that principle. In the end, Fred Rogers didn't just create a television show. He created a standard. A standard that said, this is what it looks like to actually care about children. Not to use them. Not to exploit them. Not to pander to adults' prejudices in their name, but to genuinely, sacrificially care about their well-being and their dignity. And when someone asked him to lower that standard, to compromise, to be strategic, to acknowledge the economic realities, Fred Rogers said no. And he kept saying no until the people who mattered, the parents, the teachers, the communities who actually cared about children, stood up and said, we'll pay for the world we want our children to grow up in. That's the story that should be told. Not just that Fred Rogers was kind, but that he was brave, that he was willing to lose everything rather than teach children that racism was acceptable. That's the Fred Rogers we should remember. The one who chose bankruptcy over bigotry. The one who valued every child's dignity more than any sponsor's money. The one who kept his promises even when it cost him everything. Because in the end, that's what love actually looks like. Not warm feelings, not nice words, but sacrifice, risk, the willingness to lose what you treasure most to protect what matters most. Fred Rogers loved children enough to risk his life's work for them. And in doing so, he taught us all what real courage looks like.